Awesome. 2 out of 3, and now spotlight. Oh, amazing. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. I hope the week has been okay. Everybody's okay. Yes, Hashem. Difficult week. I know all of our attention still is on Israel and also for Jewish communities around the world who are struggling. And we continue to daven, to say Tehillim, and to say our own personal prayers that Hashem send the Yeshua to our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Give a refuah shlema to those who need whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, psychological, spiritual. Bring home the hostages. There's negotiations, and with God's help, maybe they will be fruitful. And the men and women, the boys and girls, the babies will be brought home to their families. And here will be made very quickly. And we'll hopefully see an end to we'll see the right end to the fighting, meaning an end that accomplishes what it needs to do. So we will continue to dedicate our Limud Torah in the school of all those who need Hashem's attention and refuah. And let's begin. Parashat Yitro. So Parashat Yitro, of course, is one of the 2 parashot in the Torah which have at its center the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances, the 10 sayings, not the 10 commandments, because that is a mistranslation. But we're not going to begin with the Aseret HaDibrot. I do want to begin the very beginning of the Parsha. So if you're following in the Chumash, you're opening up Sefer Shemot, Perek Yud 18, and we'll just do the first pasuk. I want to share a really interesting idea in the first pasuk. So I'll read it first in the Hebrew, then English. Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan Koten Moshe Et Kol Asher Asa Elokim LaMoshe Uli Yisrael Amo Ki Hotzi Hashem Et Yisrael MiMitzrayim. Stone Art Scroll Translation Interpretation. Yitro, the minister of Midyan, the father-in-law of Moshe, heard everything that Hashem did to Moshe and to Israel, his people, that Hashem had taken Israel out of Egypt. So let me ask just a basic question. Based on the information that the Pasuk tells us, what is it that Yitro heard? So we go over it again. So the Pasuk says that Vayishma Yitro, Yitro heard, 8 Kol Asher Asa Elokim LaMoshe Uli Yisrael Amo. Everything that Hashem did to Moshe and to Israel, his people, because Hashem had taken them out of Mitzrayim. So what is it that he heard? He heard everything that was done. Everything that was done. So you can think to yourself, so what might be included in that general description of everything that was done? You might say the Eser Makot. You might say Makad Bechorot. There's so many things that you can include. But let's take a look at this Rashi. So Rashi says Vayishma Yitro. And Rashi wants to know, is there something specific that Yitro heard? Because the Torah doesn't specify, it just gives this general description, as we just sort of deciphered that right now. So Rashi's question, I'm going to read from the Rashi, Mashmu'a Shama Uba. What is it that Yitro heard? Mashmu'a, what did he hear? Uba. What is it that he heard that apparently motivated him, inspired him to pack up his bags and to go from his home in Midian and to track down Bnei Israel in the desert? What is it that he heard? And Rashi says, Kriyat Yamsuf Umilchemet Amalek. Rashi's not making this up. He refers to, as he always does, early rabbinic traditions in the Gemara and the Midrash. And he said, and those sources, Rashi quotes, says, well, there is actually 2 specific things that Yitro is responding to. The first one is the Kriyat Yamsuf, the story of crossing the Red Sea, the splitting of the sea, and everything that happened connected to that story. And the second thing is Milchemet Amalek. Now, Milchemet Amalek is at the end of previous Parsha, which is Bishalach. The Bnei Israel, while traveling in the desert, they're at a place called Rephidim, and that is where Amalek attacks them. It's a vicious attack. It's a cowardly attack. If you're imagining the camp of the Jewish people, obviously there are those who are unable to keep up with the pace of the rest of the nation, and they're lagging behind. And while the Torah tells us that war was fought in last week's Parsha, it's really only in Parsha Ki Teitzei and Sefer Devarim that we learn about the scope of this battle. Where in Parsha Ki Teitzei, which by the way are the 3 verses that we read on Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat that was designated before Purim is when we remind ourselves that there is a mitzvah from the Torah to remember what Amalek did and to blot out their memory. So those last three psukim tell us that Amalek came, they attacked at the back of the camp, and they attacked those who were the most indefensible, the most tired. Ayef v'yageya. Those who are the tired, those are the ones who really can't protect themselves. Those are the ones who are not in any position to lift up a sword or a spear and to fight. And those are the people that Amalek slaughtered. So that's the end of Parashat Bishalach. So according to this, Yitro heard about two things, two specific events, which, I don't know, deeply impacted him. Event number one, Kriyat Yamsuf. Event number two was the attack against the Jewish people by Amalek and the counterattack by the Jewish people. Because that also is part of the end of Parashat Bishalach. The attack and the counterattack. After it was over, Moshe turns to Yoshua. Hashem turns to Moshe, tells Yoshua to pick an army, and they are to go out and to pitch a battle against Amalek. Moshe was going to ascend the mountain. And Moshe, while standing on the mountain, raises his hands as Bnei Israel below, in the valley below, battles Amalek. And the Mishnah Masechet Rosh Hashanah tells us that as long as Moshe's hands were raised, Israel has the edge and is winning the battle. And if Moshe chas v'sholom lowered his hands, then the tide would turn, and Amalek, in fact, would win the battle. And so because his hands were getting heavy, the Torah tells us Aharon and Hur supported his hands with rock underneath, so his hands would not fall. Okay, so that's the preface, that's the background to the beginning of the Parsha. Rabbi Ephraim Twersky is a rabbi who lives currently in Chicago, and he authored his collection of interesting insights on the Torah called Sarei Elafim. And a creative thinker. I love some of the things that he has written, and from time to time I brought his works to you. And I want to share with you Rabbi Twersky's explanation. And this is not like a short, it's a little longer piece. So I'm going to ask everybody for their indulgence because he sort of builds and puts pieces together. So Rabbi Twersky asks the following question based on the pasuk that we read. Again, so Vayishma Yitro. So he reminds us what Rashi said. Rashi's point is that Yitro heard those two events, Kriyat Yamsuf and Mohammed Amalek. And then he says he's puzzled by Rashi because that's not what the Torah says. That's the intent that Rashi adds to it based on the rabbinic tradition. But if you're just to read the pasuk, you don't see the words Kriyat Yamsuf, you don't see the word Mohammed Amalek. Why is it that the rabbinic tradition that Rashi upholds suggests it's those two events? If you read the words Kol Asher Asa Elokim, why not take a look at the bigger picture? The bigger picture was the last year in Eretz Mitzrayim. The last year was filled with Eser Makot. That's like extraordinary. And some of the things that Hashem did in Eretz Mitzrayim, these Makot, never been seen by human eyes before, and never again. That didn't travel. That was not worth social media. Like he didn't hear about that. That wasn't worthy of getting up and coming to meet Moshe and the Jewish people after hearing about all those things. Killing the firstborn of every Egyptian family or every animal in Egypt, that itself would have been enough. But be that as it may, according to Rashi, no. Rashi says there's two things specifically, Kriyat Yamsuf and Milchem Amalek. So Rabbi Twersky's question is, what drove Rashi to sort of focus on those two things, or perhaps what drove our Chachamim specifically to highlight those two things? And so here's where he begins to sort of build the pieces as an answer. So I'm going to just read another pasuk, which is in Perek Yud Chet. It's pasuk Yud. And here's the pasuk. Vayomer Yitro. So now this pasuk is the pasuk that Yitro had already arrived. Pasuk Aleph tells us he heard about it, that packed up his suitcases and started a journey. We're skipping the 9 pasukim, and now we're reading pasuk 10. And in pasuk 10, the Torah tells us about after he arrived, this is a conversation that happens between Yitro and Moshe's father-in-law and son-in-law. Vayomer Yitro, Baruch Hashem, asher hitzil etchem miyad Mitzrayim umiyad Paro, asher hitzil et ha'am mitachat yad Mitzrayim. English, Yitro said, blessed is Hashem, who has rescued you from the hand of Egypt and from the hand of Paro, who has rescued the people from under the hand of Egypt. Rabbi Twersky says, when you take a look at Torah and we apply the rabbinic lens as we always do, one of the criteria of understanding the Torah through the eyes of the Chachamim is that the Torah is written with an economy of words, meaning that if 2 words would suffice, you don't write 3. And if 5 words would suffice, you don't write 6. So when words appear multiple times, that if you were to remove them from the verse makes perfect sense, then that's a sign you need to stop and sort of peel back a layer and see what the hidden meaning is. So Rabbi Twersky says, let's go back to this verse, and you'll see that within this one verse, there's a word that appears 3 times. I hope you caught it. I'll read it again in the Hebrew. Listen to see if you can figure out the word is. Vayomer Yitro Baruch Hashem asher hitzil etchem miyad Mitzrayim umiyad Paro asher hitzil et ha'am mitachat yad Mitzrayim. It's the word yad, which appears 3 times. And Twersky maintains, he says, you know what? We could technically reconstruct this verse, and we don't even need to have the word yad there. It could say, Baruch Hashem, asher hitzil etchem mimitzrayim umiparo, asher hitzil et ha'am mitachad Mitzrayim. You could eliminate all 3 of these words yad, and the pasuk would be still okay. The integrity of the pasuk will not be violated. But if the word yad appears 3 times, and it could be eliminated without changing the meaning of the verse, ostensibly, then that's a reason to stop, pause, think, and figure this out. And that's what he's about to do. So we've got 2 questions. First question, when the Torah says that Paro heard Yitro heard generally everything that was done, Rashi sort of jumps right away to 2 specific things. Question number 1, why does he jump to those two specific things? And in helping us get to the answer, he asks us what's the significance of the word yad in verse 10 that appears 3 times. So he reminds us when a Jew wakes up every morning, what's the first bracha we were saying? Not the first tefillah. What's the first blessing that a Jew makes every morning? Asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim. That's the first bracha we make. Now that's significant, that the first bracha a Jew makes every morning is supposed to somehow direct our attention to the notion of our hands. Now, the word netilat yadayim, most of us think, it means sort of washing the hands. It's not an incorrect definition, but it's not the only definition. Netilah also means to raise up. You remember the other bracha where we use the word netilah, and it's not wash, it's to raise up? Al netilat lulav. And what does it mean when we say the bracha al netilat lulav? We're not washing the lulav, we're raising the lulav. That's the mitzvah, is to hold the lulav and etrog and to raise it up, and then of course we do the traditional shaking as our rabbis teach us. So Rabbi Twersky wants to remind us that the idea of netilat yadayim in the morning is not simply washing the hands, although there's definitely part of the ritual that we do, but it has this other level and texture of meaning as well, which is to raise our hands. And what does it mean to raise our hands? And we have found out, listen to this, it's so clever. I just told you in the introduction to this Dvar Torah, do you remember the war between Amalek and Bnei Israel? What was Moshe doing during the time of the battle? He was standing on the mountain. And what was he doing on the mountain? He was raising his hands. So there's a connection between Amalek and the notion of raising one's hands. He didn't let his hands fall. And you remember the Mishnah where, according to the Mishnah Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the Mishnah says, what? Are these magic hands? Are you trying to imply that Moshe's hands had some sort of magical power, and if his hands were up, the Jewish people somehow gained this magical strength, and if his hands drop, that strength is deleted? Is that really what we're talking about? Is this superstition? What are we? It's not voodoo. And the Mishnah says, no. It means that as long as Moshe's hands were up, what was he doing? You can just imagine the scene. There's a mountain, and people are fighting for their lives, for the lives of their grandparents who were killed and savagely beaten. And so they're looking at the mountain, Moshe's there, and they're watching his hands, and it's lifting their hearts. They're understanding their relationship to Hashem. And the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah says, it's not that his hands won the war. It's whenever people looked at his hands and with their hearts, they're understanding who they are in the relationship to Hashem, that gave them the strength. It gave them the emunah. The hands were just the vehicle or the vessel by which the emunah was strengthened. That's the purpose of the hands, Moshe's raised hands on the mountain during this battle. Okay. Then he says, I'm just going to, I see just somebody's not, I'm muting everybody again because I'm hearing some background noise. Excuse me. I hope we're okay then. So I'm going to go a little bit further with Rabbi Tursky's analysis here of the story. And here he quotes Chassam Sofer, who in his explanations to the Torah makes a really interesting point. He says, when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, according to our Chachamim, they had reached the 49th level of Tumah. They had sunk so low that they were demoralized both psychologically. I don't know why, but somebody is unmuting, and I ask if you please don't unmute during the course of the shiur, and we will definitely do so afterwards. Thank you, everybody. So when the Jewish people were in Mitzrayim, our Chachamim tell us that they had sunk so low. But why? What is it that made them so demoralized? What made them give up hope? What made them feel that who they were as Jews, who they were in the relationship to Hashem, what Yaakov had taught them generations before, what happened? So the Gemara tells us in Masechet Sota that the Egyptians were very clever. They're very manipulative, not just physically, and forced the Jews into forced labor camp, but they were very manipulative psychologically. And that's, we see, of course, that the enemies of the Jewish people have used this tactic on us time and time again. They play not only with our bodies, they play with our minds. But in what way did they play with the minds of the Jewish people? According to the Gemara, the way they played with the minds of the Jewish people is they gave them tasks to do, to build things. Well, we know that. The Torah tells us that they built Pitom and Ramses. But here's the thing that we don't know explicitly from the Torah, but our Torah Shabbat Peh fills this in. The tasks that they asked them to do were absolutely meaningless. Meaningless. One of the things that the Gemara says is they told them to build buildings on sand. Well, you can't build a building on sand. Why? Because it collapses. So imagine that. Imagine you get a slave, and day after day you're telling them, schlep this, build that, huck that, put it together, day after day after day. And all he got to see after weeks or months of his work was the collapse of the building. Imagine the demoralization. Nothing I do matters. I can't make a difference in the world. I try to get ahead, but it all just collapses in front of my eyes. This is torturous. Sometimes psychological torture is even worse than physical torture. Many of us can maybe withstand certain degrees of physical discomfort or even pain, but to play with our heads, to play with the meaning of our lives, to take away the things that matter the most to our neshamas, that in some ways is even far crueler. You can withstand things if you think you have purpose. Take a look at Sharansky, who was able to withstand years in Siberia and in prison camp. Why? Because he was committed to a cause. That's us. That's the Jewish people. We're committed. You might want to beat us and try to annihilate us physically. You cannot destroy us because of our commitment and our emunah. But if you take away our emunah, if you demoralize us, there's amazing things that will happen, and they're not good. And so Bnei Israel had sunk and sunk and sunk and sunk. So what does that represent in Tversky's eyes? The koach of our hands. The hands are the most productive part of our bodies. This is what we build with. We build with our hands. But if our hands are used to build things that have no lasting import, then our hands lose their significance. And Hashem wanted specifically to raise the emunah level of the Jewish people. He wanted to pass this message on that no, do not believe, do not succumb to the vile message that you don't matter. You do matter. And not only do you matter, you were created in the divine image. And as Hashem is the ultimate creator, we are in his image, so we become smaller versions of a creator. That is what we do. And so when Hashem, I'm going to read a little bit now from Tversky. Kishotzi Hashem itbarach et bnei Yisrael mitzrayim, and Hashem took the Jewish people out of Egypt. Lo dai shodia lahem shemaseim be'emet oseim yoshem. Not only did he tell them that your actions do make a positive impression, But he said, but not only your hands, I'm giving you, I'm implanting in you a divine strength and ability. You have divine power. Not that you are gods, but I'm giving you aspects of divine strength. I want you to know, says Hashem to the Jewish people, that the things that you do are imbued with divine importance. Do not think of yourself as meaningless, and do not think of what you do as being meaningless. In other words, your hands, al netilat yadayim, are being raised to a level of meaning that is connected to Hashem in Shemayim. So what Tversky is trying to do, of course, is to explain to us that the notion of yadayim matters. But you remember where else the yad mattered? Do you remember another story happened not too long ago, last week's Parsha, where the hand was the agent that taught that meaning? Do you remember? So let's talk about Kriyat Yamsuf. Kriyat Yamsuf, Moshe is standing there, and what does Hashem say to Moshe Rabbeinu? He says, Va'ata harem et matcha unetei et yadcha al ha'am uveka'ehu. So I want to make sure. I'll tell you what most translations of this are. And you, Moshe, lift harem, lift your staff, and netei, and stretch out your hand on the sea and split it. That's not an incorrect explanation, but I have to tell you that there is a fascinating explanation that leharit, to lift up your hand, has another connotation. Do you know what it means? Get rid of. What? Get rid of what? Harem, get rid of matcha. Get rid of the stick, Moshe. I don't want the stick to play any part in this Kriyat Yamsuf. No, get rid of the stick, put it down, rest it down on the ground, and then what? And then what? I want you to do this. Netei et yadcha. I want your hand stretched out. I want the water to split at the signal of, not the stick, I want the water to split at the signal of your hand, because our hands are imbued with this divine power. Our hands are symbols of meaningful action. Our hands are symbol of human beings, or the Jewish people specifically, being, as it were, agents of God's will in this world. And so now, it's so beautiful the way he puts this together. Now, let's go back to the very first pasuk. And what did it say again? Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan Koten Moshe et kol asher asa Elokim leMoshe. He heard everything that Hashem did to Moshe and the Jewish people. What's the everything? Rashi says two things: Kriyat Yamsuf and Milchemet Amalek. Why those two things? Because there was a message. There was a message that Hashem wanted to give to the Jewish people, and that is, what you do matters. Your hands are the agents of God's creative power in the world. And when Yitro understood that, and he saw that these two specific things actually are a sign of everything that God did to the Jewish people. He took them out of Egypt. He raised them up from the 49th level. He imbued within them a purpose for the world, for their lives, and made them feel that what they do matters. He says, now I understand why Rashi and the Chachamim specifically zeroed in on Kriyat Yamsuf and Milchemet Amalek, because those two things were performed critically and centrally with Moshe's hands. And therefore, by the way, and I'm going to read the last paragraph of this beautiful Dvar Torah, at least I think it's beautiful. Al kain patach Hashem yitbarach et ha'amad hanifkar, and therefore Hashem began the first words of course, the Aseret HaDibrot. B'ma'amar Anochi Hashem Elokecha, when he said, I am Hashem your God. Sheperusha, which means, Anochi Hashem Elokutchecha, I am Hashem, the divine aspect of you. Asher Hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, I took you out of Egypt, which means Milachshov she'ein ma'asecha osim noshem. I took you out of Egypt. I wanted you to understand that the message that Egyptians tried to brainwash you with, which is what? You don't matter. You don't make a difference. Whatever you do, it falls, it crumbles, it collapses. You have no lasting legacy in the world. What a heartbreaking message for any human being, but Jews especially. We don't want that. What do we mean in life? What do we do in life? Does what we do matter? If you take that away from me, if you make me feel I have no legacy, if you make me feel I have no continuation in life, then what's the point of my life? Then I give up because there is no tomorrow. I could live if you made me feel that even if I don't survive my kids, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, then I have a chiyus and I have something to hope for, to hang on to. You take that away from me, nothing. And that's what the Egyptians tried to do to the Jewish people. And so, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tzeitichem me'eretz Mitzrayim, I took you out, which means I wanted to eradicate this vile and pessimistic idea that they try to put in your head to make you think that what you do doesn't matter. Ve'enakti alecha ve'al ma'asecha ve'diburecha koach loki. And therefore, I as it were, gave you this gift that your words, your actions, all that you do has divine inspiration to it. Shehiyu ma'asecha v'diburecha osim roshim. That all your words, all your actions will have a positive impact b'chol ha'olamot, in all the worlds. V'alkein tir'eh lishmor u'laharichotam, and therefore it should be assigned to you to value them kira'ui, as is necessary and appropriate. What a beautiful idea! What a beautiful notion of our hands, and that, by the way, of course, imbues, I believe, that mitzvah of every day we wash our hands. We teach kids, don't we? Little kids, you wash nagelwasser, to have your little water near your bed. It sounds like it's a little thing. It's not a little kid thing. It's for all of us. When we wake up in the morning and we wash our hands, what we're doing is not just cleaning our hands. We're making a declaration about our contribution. We make a difference. Our hands matter. I'm sanctifying my hands. I'm going to do great things today. That's why you woke up. Hashem gives you life every single day. Why? Because he believes you have a contribution to make. The minute Hashem looks at us and says, you know what, you're done, there's nothing that you're going to add to the world today, then our neshamas don't return to our bodies. Our breathing life, the day we every morning we wake up, it's a sign that Hashem believes that we have a tafkid, we have a job to do. And that's why, of course, I'll conclude this Torah with what you already know. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. That's the first words that come out of a Jew's mouth every morning. Modeh ani lefanecha. I thank you. Modeh ani lefanecha. What? Shehachazarta bi nishmati, that you return my neshama to me. I'm sleeping. It's almost like a mini death. I don't know what's going on. I'm unconscious. I'm not aware of the world around me. Hachazarta bi nishmati bechemla. You return with your kindness, your compassion, and neshama to my body. Bechemla rabba emunatecha. Literally means rabba emunatecha, and great is your faith. Wait a minute. Isn't that a little backwards? Should it be great as my faith in God? Why is it that the Modeh Ani ends with my declaration, Hashem, your faith is great? But what's your faith? What does God has faith in? And the answer, based on what I just said a second ago, is God has faith in me. He has faith in you. That's why you woke up. He has faith in you. Faith in you to do what? That what you do will matter, will make a difference. You don't have to solve cancer to make a difference. You might have to make a difference to one person. Maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your father, maybe it's your mother, maybe it's a person you come in contact with in the office. Maybe the difference you make is somebody waiting in line with the TTC that you people respect that never had any respect that day. I don't know what it is, but I have a value. And Hashem says to me, that's why you're here. And that's what Hashem was trying to say to the Jewish people. And we, of course, have this extra level of obligation to be the Or Legoyim. We bring that to the people. We set a moral standard, even if the listeners don't always want to listen, even if the haters continue to hate. We have a message, and we believe that our message will last. Paro's message did not. He wreaked tremendous suffering on the Jewish people, tremendous suffering. I can't even begin to imagine. Those who were Holocaust survivors have a more ability to see this and have lived through it. But I cannot imagine what it was like to have babies thrown in the river. I cannot imagine what it was like to have husbands and fathers and grandfathers be beaten to death while building. But that happened. That happened then, happens now, it happened October the 7th. It's so much suffering. But the story of Mitzrayim is not a story of them, as I keep saying. It's a story of now. Paro was defeated. His army was defeated. They didn't see it when it happened, meaning the Jewish people didn't know that when they entered into slavery, this was going to end that way. They couldn't imagine it, but it did. And here at Son, may we also merit to see the defeat of our enemies the way the Jewish people saw it at Kriyat Yamsuf. Okay, I'm going to go on a little bit more. 18:3. I'm going to go back to the beginning of Perek Yudchet. Jumped around a little bit. I want to read the Pasuk Gimel. So Yitro, when he heard about these two things, he left his home to come to meet Moshe. But he didn't come by himself. He came with Tzipporah, Moshe's wife, and Moshe's two sons. So let's just back up a little bit to make sure that everybody understands that history. Moshe escaped from Mitzrayim after killing the Egyptian. We know the story. He ran away and spent 40 years living in Midian. While he was there, he got married to Yitro's daughter Tzipporah and had two kids. Then there's the story of the burning bush, and Hashem says, I'm sending you back there. It's Mitzrayim. Perfect. So Moshe and Tzipporah and the two sons begin their journey going to Mitzrayim. Moshe, Hashem said, I'm going to send Aharon, your brother, to meet you en route. And then the two of you will make your way back to Mitzrayim, and you'll do whatever I've told you to do. That's great. According to the Midrash, this is not a text in the Torah, but it's part of the Torah Shabbat. When Aharon did, in fact, meet Moshe after not seeing him for 40 years, he met for the first time Tzipporah and Moshe's two boys. And he says, who are they? And Moshe says, this is my wife and two kids. And Aharon says, where are they going? What do you mean? Hashem told me to go back there. It's Mitzrayim, so I'm going back with my family. At which point, Aharon said to Moshe, I don't think that's a good idea, because right now all of the Jews are suffering. Why would you bring more Jews to suffer? It doesn't make sense for you to expose 3 Jews to suffering. It makes more sense for you to perhaps save them from this. Moshe was convinced, and then he told Tzipporah and the 2 boys to go back home to spend time with Yitro. Okay, so now we rejoin the story. Tzipporah and the 2 sons have gone back to Midian. And now, after the Kriyat Yamsuf and Milchemet Amalek, we pick up the story beginning of Parsha Yitro. And now Yitro comes with Tzipporah and the 2 boys to meet Moshe. Okay, and so they meet. And let's just take a look now for Pasuk Gimel. Ve'et shnei baneha asher shem ha'echad Gershom ki amar ger hayiti be'eretz nochriya. So the Torah wants us to understand, or to inform us, of the names of Moshe's 2 sons who were born while in Midian. So the first son, I'll read the English now. And the 2 sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for he had said, I was a sojourner in a strange land. Now, you don't hear that so much in the English. You don't see the etymological connection, but I'm going to try and point it out. In Hebrew, Gershom, Gimel, Resh, Shin, Mem, Gershom, you hear the word Ger. And so according to the Torah, Moshe deliberately called his son Gershom to invoke the name Ger, which means stranger. In English, they use the word sojourner. Because Ger Hayiti be'eretz nochia, because I was a sojourner, I was a stranger in a strange land. Then the next son, Ha'echad Eliezer, his other son was called Eliezer. Why? Kelokei avi be'ezri va'yatzileni micherev paro. Where God of my father came to my aid, and he saved me from the sword of Paro. So again, you don't see it so much in the English, but the name Eliezer, the last 3 letters, Ayin, Zayin, Resh, La'azor, to help. Eliezer, because of Be'ezri, God help me. Okay, Gershom and Eliezer. Let's just talk about Gershom, that's the Bar Torah. So, one more time, let's unpack this. We have 2 boys, and he calls one of his sons Gershom. Why? Because I was a stranger in a strange land. Which land is Moshe talking about when he says I was a stranger in a strange land? So there's 2 choices, because it's either Mitzrayim or Midian. He was never anywhere else. Those are the two places that he could have been. So I want to read to you the Meshech Chochmah. Meshech Chochmah, Rabbi Simcha Meir in Dvinsk, wrote a commentary. And he says, I find this to be a little bit a touching explanation with a little bit of insight, sort of drawing the curtain back and understanding a little bit about the emotional angst that Moshe Rabbeinu was going through. The names themselves tell you something about that. He named his kids names that would evoke in him at least some feeling that they mattered. These boys were born in Midian, but their birth in Midian somehow had a message from Moshe. So I'm going to read the Meshech Chochmah. It's a short explanation. It's not so long. Misaper Ma'alot Moshe. This name tells us a little bit about the qualities, the characteristics, the positive characteristics of Moshe. Echaya kashur el ahavat amo. How he was tied to the love of his people, the Jewish people. Asher im ki lo hikirotam. Even if he really didn't know them that well, ki nitgadel bebeit Paro, because after all, where was he raised? He was raised in the house of Paro. He wasn't raised amongst Jews. He was raised in a country where Jews were enslaved. He didn't regularly sort of go out and spend time with Jews. Moshe was born following Joseph's death, so there may have been Jews in the country, but he wasn't socializing with them. They were a slave class, and he, as the Prince of Egypt, literally the Prince of Egypt, would have seen them ought to have seen them in his superior status as being chattel, as being slaves, whose lives really didn't matter. But according to the Meshech Chochmah, that's not the way Moshe Rabbeinu actually felt about them. Even though he didn't really know them because he grew up in Paro's palace, V'haya chotein yitro kohen Midian. And then when he ran away, he ended up marrying whom? The daughter of the priestess of Midian. Clearly, he's not running away to Batherston Lawrence. He's not going to make Sharon. He's going to a Goyish country where he ends up being the son-in-law of a guy who was of Oved Avodah Zarah. Yes, Yitro later converts. That's true. But as Moshe first encounters Yitro, he hasn't converted yet. He's not. So he now begins to go from Egypt to now be part and integrate, assimilate into a milieu, which also is not Jewish. Ve'amo mishuka'im batitu v'chemar, leaving the Jewish people to, as it were, to be thrust in all sorts of savage situations in the mud and in the mortar of the building in Egypt. V'chol zot, nonetheless, says Meshech Chochmah, haya nechshav be'inei atzmo, in his own eyes, in Moshe's own eyes, leger be'eretz nochiriyah, he saw himself as a stranger in a strange land. Which is the strange land? Midian. His home country is not Midian. His home country, his heart is where? Egypt. His heart was in Egypt. V'hayachu shevet eretz Mitzrayim asher sham amo le'eretz achuzato. He thought of Egypt as his homeland. Why? Not because of Paro's house, but because that was where his people lived. That's where the Jewish nation lived. There was nobody living in Eretz Yisrael because all of Yaakov and his whole family moved, as you remember the story, they moved into Egypt because of the famine. So there's no Jews. All of the Jews that he knew, all of his people, all of his tribe lived in Eretz Mitzrayim. And that's where he felt his affinity. That's where he felt his connection. V'tze'aro al zeh. And it bothered him. He suffered from this. He couldn't feel settled. This always nagged at him. V'tzaro al zeh haya gadol. And this was a great upset for him. Ad ki lo hirgish behatzalato, to the point that even though he was saved, even though he was the beneficiary of God's kindness, v'lo kara'oto shem sha'azro v'tzilo mecheru paro. He never called his kids, he never called Gershom, look, God saved me, remember? He was threatened with murder. He killed the Egyptian and they came after him. The SS troops and the Secret Service were out to kill him. And God saved him. But that's not what he thinks about. What he thinks about is, I wish I want to be back there. I want to go back there. Why? It's not because he loved Egyptian culture. And it's not because he missed the movies. And it's not because he missed all the great shopping in downtown Cairo. He wanted to go back because he missed his people. And so the Meshech Chochmah was saying, wow, this is an insight into Moshe's character. He felt unsettled. He never had his place. And even though he had technically a much better life, a quieter life, an unperturbed life in Mijan, which everybody could say may be better, he knew in his heart of hearts that his place was with the Jewish people and not in Mijan. And that's one of the reasons he called his kids by that name. Okay. I'm skipping a little because there are a couple of debates where I really want to share with you. I really enjoy. Okay, I'm going to turn now to chapter 19. We could just spend a whole year on any one parsha. Yitro for sure, because it has the Aseret to be brought. Maybe, instead of doing Parsha Shavua, maybe not instead of. In addition to, do Parsha Shavua, and then 1 year, all of Parsha Yitro, the whole thing. Boy, it'd take us more than a year. It really would. It really would. There's so much. Okay. I'm going to go to the beginning of chapter 19. B'chodesh hashalishi letzeit b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, b'yom hazeh ba'u midbar Sinai. In the 3rd month from the exodus of the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, on this day they arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. So, by the way, as you probably know, the months in the Hebrew calendar really don't have any names. That came many years later. The way in which the Torah designates Hebrew months is by number, with the number 1 month being, not Tishrei, Nisan. From Perek Yud Beit of Sefer Shemot, Parsha Bo, we learned that Hashem designates from that point on forever, Chodesh Nisan is month number 1. And so, by the way, when we read the sections of the Torah which talk about all the Chagim and the Yom Tovim, when it gets to Tishrei, which has Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini, etc., that's month number 7. So we think of it as Tishrei somehow in our head because of, it's a Rosh Hashanah. It is a Rosh Hashanah, but it's not the 1st month. So now we're in the 3rd month. It's on the 3rd month that they arrive, the Jewish people, at this desert. So the 3rd month is Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. So they're reaching Sivan. They're reaching, the desert. They're reaching the desert. That's right, on the 3rd month. Now we're going to Pasuk 2. Vayisu mirefidim, vayavo midbar Sinai, vayachanu b'midbar, vayichan sham Yisrael neged ahar. I want to read that in English. They sojourned from Refidim and arrived at the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. And Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. Of course, the mountain that we're talking about is Har Sinai. Okay, I'm going to read this again. And I want you to see if you can, in my reading, am I saying it out loud? If you have a book, follow the book. There's something out of place here, something out of order. It seems to be in the correct order, not the logical order. B'chodesh hashlishi, let's say Bnei Yisrael, on the 3rd month that they left Mitzrayim, on this day, they arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. Vayisu mirefidim, they traveled from Refidim and they arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. And that's where they encamped opposite the mountain. What's out of order? Well, the Torah tells us that they arrived before they left. If they arrived, where were they beforehand? They were in a place called Refidim. So the correct order is to say, Vayisu mirefidim, they left Refidim and they arrived at the desert. But verse 1 starts the opposite. They arrived at the desert, Midbar Sinai, and verse 2 says, and they left Refidim, and they arrived. Okay, so that's out of order, right? Doesn't make sense. It should say, Vayisu, they left, and they arrived. And here it says they arrived, and they left the place first, and then they arrived again. So, again, these are textual difficulties. I'm going to use the word difficulties that do not escape the critical eye of our rabbinic tradition and the biblical commentary. So I'm going to share with you the insight of the Sochatchover Rebbe, the Shem Mishmuel, of Avram Bornstein, between the years 1910 and 1926. The Rabbi Bornstein, who was a Sochatchov Chassid, applied his insights and his talents and his Hasidic interpretations of things to the Torah and wrote a very popular explanation called Shem Mishmuel, because his name was Shmuel Bornstein. And It's popular. You can buy it in any bookstore. It's not like a manuscript that nobody has access to. So he tries to explain why it would say first that they arrived and second they left. So he suggests that there's two levels of movement here. There is the physical movement, that's correct, but it's not the only movement. There needs to be a spiritual movement, and this is his point. If in fact the Jewish people left Egypt at the lowest spiritual point that they were, and we talked a little bit about that before, and they're en route now to a moment of such greatness and transformation that they needed to be ready for that. People need to get ready for that. So what needed to happen for that moment in time, for that revelation of Har Sinai to take root? What needed to happen for that revelation to be not only meaningful for them, but for their kids and for us here in Toronto at the end of January 2023? They needed to get ready. And so the Shem Yishmuel, Rabbi Bornstein, the Sochachover Rebbe, second Sochachover Rebbe, says the following, that this is not out of order if we understand that two things are happening, and they're not necessarily physical. There's a spiritual component, and there's a physical component. The spiritual component is verse 1. They arrived at the wilderness. The physical component is they left Rephidim. What's the pshat? Like, what does that mean? It means this. There are times in our lives that we must be able to see ourselves in the future other than we are now in the present. I'll say that again. There are times that we must be able to see ourselves in the future other than what we are now in the present. If you can't dream of being anything other than you are today, there's no growth. You have to be able to see yourself. You have to be able to aspire to something. You have to be able to have in your heart this notion of saying, I'm not a finished product. I'm not a finished product. The minute you think of yourself as a finished product, you have no tomorrow. I'm done. I'm finished. But if I have other things I can do, you're not finished. You're growing. You're contributing. If you can't see a continual opportunity for you to contribute in some way to yourself, to the world, to your family, to your neighbors, to your own spirituality, then you're finished. It's a type of living death. And so according to the Rebbe, according to the Shem Yishmuel, that's what it means. That even before they left Rephidim, they were understood that there's something great waiting for them. And they were able to lift their spirits in anticipation. They understood that the next step they were taking is going to be a step that changed them somehow. They may not have known all aspects of it. Of course, how would they know what the Azara they brought are about? But they knew because Moshe Rabbeinu had told them, we're going to take you out of this country, Egypt, and I'm going to take you somewhere and something's going to happen. I'm going to take you to a mountain. You're going to have an experience that you're not going to forget. And so they began to see this and aspire to it and get excited about it. That, says this Shem Yishmuel, the Rebbe, that's what it means when it says in the first pasuk, they arrived at Midbar Sinai. They arrived spiritually. They arrived psychologically. Physically, that journey started next pasuk, pasuk Bey, by Isume Refidim, and then they journeyed. Sometimes we need to get ourselves ready with a sense of purpose, even before we take our first step on a journey. Some journeys are easy, some journeys are hard, but we need to be ready for that journey. Some journeys will take a long time, some journeys will take a short time. But according to the Shem Yishmuel, that's what was going on here. And of course, as I keep saying all the time, this is really not just about Bnei Israel, it's about all of us. All of us understand that. Sometimes we need to take that deep breath, focus, think, meditate, and then we begin our task. That moment of stopping and focus and meditating, that's where we think of what it's going to look like in the future for us, what we can do. So that's like arriving in the future without moving your body in the present. And that's the Ba'u Vayisu. And I just want to add on to this a beautiful, extraordinary idea that I think you're going to really love. When I heard about it, I said, whoa, that's a really beautiful word. So Bnei Israel are camping at the foot of the mountain, Har Sinai. It's amazing. And so as they're camping here, Moshe Rabbeinu is getting a series of instructions from God that he's obligated to tell Bnei Israel. And he's supposed to go and tell them about things that they must do and things that they are not allowed to do. So one of the things that they're not allowed to do is they're not allowed to climb up to the mountain, at least not at a certain point in time. When God's presence is there, that's very clear. But after that, the mountain, by the way, the mountain has no sanctity, as you probably know. Har Sinai has absolutely no Kedusha today. None, zero. Har Rabbi, where the Beit HaMikdash is built, whoa, that Kedusha is everlasting. But where God came down and gave the world, Jewish people, and through the Jewish people of the world, the Aseret Dibrot, that mountain, nothing. It's just a mountain. That's all it is. It's fascinating. You would think that the mountain that became the focal point of God's revelation to human beings would somehow retain this sanctity revelation, and that, in fact, is not the case. So here is I want to read now, Perek Yutet Pasuk Yud Bet. So Hashem is telling Moshe, okay, here's instructions that I need you to carry out for everybody's protection. V'higbalta et ha'am saviv lemor. You shall set boundaries for the people round about. So you have to sort of mark off, that yellow tape, a police line, do not cross. So Moshe Rabbeinu, get out that yellow tape, put markers around Har Sinai. Nobody can go. Listen to this. This is amazing. Hishamru lachem alot bahar unegoa b'katsehu. Kol hanogea bahar mot yumat. Okay, I'm going to read this again. Hishamru lachem, beware of alot bahar, ascending the mountain, unegoa b'katsehu, or touching its edge. Kol hanogea bahar, whoever touches the mountain, mot yumat, shall surely die. Okay, everybody got it? So it's no question what the plain meaning of this verse is. Tell the Jewish people they can't go up on the mountain, they can't touch the mountain. They even just touch the side of the mountain, we're done. Okay. But this is a spiritual moment. And so it's not a surprise that our Chachamim of all ages, of all generations, wants to attribute to this moment messages that are lasting. Rabbi Moshe Shiur was an Orthodox rabbi living in North America, occupied a lot of important positions in Agudas Yisrael, was a teacher, was a Rabbi of a shul, and he came up with such a really interesting message, not for his generation, but for all generations, about us and our aspirations and how we see ourselves. So listen to what he said. Hashem says to Moshe to tell the Jewish people something about this man. And I know that I'm not quoting the entirety, but listen to the message, it's beautiful. Hishamru lachem, be careful, he tells the Jewish people. Alot bahar, be careful about going up on the mountain. Be careful that when you have an opportunity to ascend the mountain of greatness, your connection to God, your connection to Torah, your connection to Yiddishkeit, be careful that if you have that opportunity, unegoa b'katseu, and what do you settle for? Just touching the side. That's it. I'm okay. I don't need that. I'll just touch the side. You can be greater than that. You can do more than that. You can alot bahar. And all you're settling for is touching the mountain. That's it. You're settling yourself short. You're selling your family short. You're selling your kids short. You could be so much more. You could show them so much more. You could show everybody so much more of yourself. Imagine the chizuk you could give, because what? Alot bahar. I'm going for it. I can do it. Hashem has faith in me. That's why I'm here today. Rather than saying, I can't, I'm afraid, I won't. I'm just going to touch the heart. What does he say? Kol hanogea bahar. That's all. If you're just settling for touching, so what sort of life is that? Mot yumat. That's like settling for an unnecessary cessation. That's metaphorically a type of death. It's a metaphorically of selling yourself short and not expecting more of yourself. And then, of course, That's what the whole revelation at Sinai was. Hashem telling us, I expect more from you. And the reason I'm expecting more from you is because you can do it. The proof is Hashem would not give us mitzvot if he didn't think we could keep them. Hashem loves us. And if he loves us, you don't set up somebody you love for failure. You don't tell your children to do something knowing 100% that this is going to hurt them and it's going to cause them pain and suffering, and just to watch them fall and fail and mock them. No, God doesn't mock us. He doesn't do that. So if Hashem gave us these mitzvot, he gave them to us because he believes that they are enriching our lives and maybe contributing to the world around us. So if you can alot bahar and you can touch the mountain and you say, I'm just going to a little piece, that's a waste. It's a waste of so many other things. And God forbid we should be wasting. Okay, I'm going to end with one more Torah. This time maybe a little bit from the Aseret HaDibrot. And we're going to jump to Perek Chaf, and I'm going to take a look at Pasuk Chet. So Perek Chaf Pasuk Chet begins, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. Sheshet Yamim ta'avod va'asita kol mlachtecha. So remember the Shabbat day to sanctify it, 6 days. Shall you work and accomplish all your work? V'yom hashvi'i Shabbat l'Hashem Elokecha lo ta'aseh chol melacha ata v'cha v'techa v'techa v'amatecha v'v'emtecha v'gircha asher b'sharecha. Excuse me, but on the 7th day it's Shabbat to Hashem, your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your slave, your maidservant, animal, and your convert within your gates. For in 6 days Hashem made the heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore, Hashem blessed the Shabbat day and sanctified it. Okay, so that's the whole package of Shabbat. Okay, so what's the point here? The point is to keep Shabbat, right? Zachor Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. But if that is the point, then why does he have to mention the 6 days of the week? Why not just say what he meant? Keep the Shabbat day and make it holy. Zachor Yom HaShabbat lekadsho l'Hashem Elokecha. That's it. Point made. Shabbos. But somehow Hashem says, okay, no, let's keep Shabbos. And then he adds this piece called the 6 days. Well, why? So I want to share this idea with you. So the 6 days are critical. What role do they play? Because they are preparatory days. The 6 days are preparatory days for Shabbos. So imagine this sort of scenario. Imagine that you have, maybe you're going to a doctor, an eye doctor, and they need to do work in your eyes, right? And so they put that stuff in and they dilate your pupils, right? And so you got to bring sunglasses. Why? Because by dilating the pupils, the minute you walk out in the sunlight, oh my gosh. So imagine you're the opposite. You're in a dark room for a protracted period of time. And you walk out of the dark room and boom, it's bright. It's hard. Yet you have to prepare. You can't do that. You can't take somebody from one extreme to the other. So Shabbat is this enormous spiritual life that Hashem promises us. Is you're going to love. This is going to be awesome. This is amazing. This is a really important part of who we are as Jews. Shabbat is a day which has the foundational abilities to teach us so many things about our relationship to God, to teach us about faith. But you can't go from 0 to 100. You need some steps in between. The Sheshet Yamim, those 6 days, are the steps in between. So, for example, what are the days of the week? Remember we talked about the months? There's no names for months in Hebrew. They're all numeric. What are the names of the month of the week? Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. Now in English we call them Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, but that's not Hebrew. That's English. In Hebrew, Yom Rishon is the first day, Yom Sheni is the second day, Yom Shlishi is the third day. Well, third is comparison to what? It's the third day as we get closer to Shabbat. So every day of the week is intended to focus our attention on getting closer to the Kedusha of Shabbat. Every day of the week is a day intended for us to understand that we are working in a framework. That framework is the framework of holiness, of sanctity. And while it may not be the Shabbat itself, it's not devoid of sanctity because my mind, the day of the week, all the things that I'm doing are hopefully gearing me up as we go closer and closer and closer to the main source of Kedusha, which is the day. So in essence, what the Torah is saying, remember that all of the week is important because it does serve to sanctify Shabbat. So even though the mitzvah seems to be keeping Shabbos, the way in which we get to that is by including other days in our preparatory. And sometimes we undervalue the role of preparation. Sometimes as Jews, we just think, okay, I can step right into it. We can't just step right into it. We got to get our mind ready. The rabbis of old said even davening is like that. Like, get right in there and there's fatting and rip it off just like this. That's not so much the type of davening that God really wanted. He wanted us to take a couple minutes, take a deep breath, meditate, just focus. Or maybe you can't focus on everything. So focus before you get to the Amidah. Take a deep breath and think about something. We do that so many times. You're going to a play. You bought beautiful tickets to a play. You're going downtown to the Murder's Theater. You're going to New York on Broadway. You get the playbill. You want to hear some of the music. You want to read some of the story. I want to be ready when I get down to sit down in my seat. I want to know what to expect. Well, wanting to know what to expect enhances your experience in so many other areas of our lives and in culture. Why not assume that it's also true for areas of our spiritual and religious life? You need to get ready for that. You need to prepare. That's what this idea is. The 6 days is a tool, is a vehicle by which it aids us in experiencing the Shabbat as it's intended to be. Wow, covered a lot of things tonight, from the first idea about the holiness of hands to the preparation for Shabbat. Just want to tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to learn Torah with you. You can spread it around and invite other people to join. I'm happy to share whatever we can learn together with other people. Thank you for joining. Please feel free to unmute yourselves, and I'm happy to sort of have an opportunity to talk a little bit with everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi Diamond.
Thank you, Rabbi Diamond. You never disappoint me. Always learn something. Thank you so much. In so many aspects.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
We say the daily prayer every day, Hayom Yom Rishon B'Shabbat.
Exactly. And then the next day is a Yom Sheni.
Yeah.
Because we are always keeping in mind. The Gemara tells us that Hillel and Shammai also did the same thing. You're getting ready for Shabbos and you're going shopping and you find something, say, oh, you know what, this would be really nice to cook on Shabbos. So the minute you do that, you're fulfilling this idea that you're keeping in mind when you're going shopping on Tuesday. What am I going to put on my Shabbos table on Friday night or Shabbos? I'm also enhancing Shabbos by bringing that into my weekday experience. I'm always looking towards Shabbos. Because it's the culmination of things, and I should be getting myself ready for it.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I hear that we Jews created time, that we defined time. Time was a concept that we were the very first ones to measure it or talk about it. And I am intrigued by the idea, where is that coming from? I understand this Shabbat, but what else can we learn from the concept of counting days? No other religion, no other people that I'm aware of managed to count or to keep track of days.
So that's an interesting question. Think about your life, Simcha, and think about the things that you count. What do people tend to count?
We count everything.
We do. But the things that I think we count with more purpose and intention are things that are important to us. Things that are not important to you, you don't really care so much how many or how few you have. But what you have that's important to you, you're going to count. You're going to count. And that, by the way, is one of the reasons halachically that things that you count can never be considered sort of nullified. You can't just include them in other things. Things that you count have their own status. Okay, which means what? Why do we count days? Because for us Jews, days matter. Time matters. Time matters because of what we can do with time. We don't want to waste time. There's no such thing. There should never be such a thing as wasted time. Unfortunately, I've had have had to officiate at far too many funerals to share this idea, but you don't have to be at a funeral to appreciate that we don't know how much time we have in our lives. That's in God's hands. That's in God's hands. When you're born and when Hashem decides your life is over is not ours to decide. That's God. What you and I do get to decide is what we do from sunset to sunrise to sunset. What you do with the time you have, that's your choice. That's your choice. You can waste your time, chas v'shalom. You can sanctify your time. You can do things positive with your time. I think Jews count time because we get it. We understand. And another reason of Soloveitchik talked about that when he talked about it in his Haggadah and on the Pesach Seder. Why is it that the very first mitzvah that Hashem gave the Jewish people was time? Why? I mean, the first mitzvah he gave was not Shabbos or Kashrut or Tzitzis. Like, why time? Okay, here's your calendar, set it up. This is Rosh Chodesh. Like, why? And so the point that he made was because Jewish people were now transitioning from slavery to freedom. Slaves don't control their time. Slaves are controlled by their masters. Their master tells them, do this, do that, now. You can't control your time. You can't go to your master and say, can I do this in half an hour? I'm sort of busy. I'm watching American Idol. You can't do it. You're a slave. You do what you're told. But if your time is yours, that's different. And so our first mitzvah was to understand the sanctity of time that we are in charge of. We are in charge of. God sanctified Shabbos. So that's, for example, when we make Kiddush, in Shabbos, we end the bracha Mikadesh HaShabbat, right? Mikadesh HaShabbat. What does that mean? God gave sanctity to the Shabbat. Because it says so in the Torah. So by Hashem made 6 days, he made the 7th day, he sanctified Shabbos. And you remember the end of Kiddush, as well as in the Amidah, the Musaf Amidah, when we daven and we make Kiddush and Shabbos, how do we end Kiddush on a Yom Tov? Mikadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. What do you mean Mikadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim? Why not simply say Mikadesh Hazmanim? No, because when it comes to Yom Tov, the Jewish people have a role to play. We decide when Rosh Chodesh is. We decide. We have a role to play in sanctifying time. Since we have a role to play, that's why we say Mikadesh Yisrael. Hashem gives Kedusha to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people themselves have an element of imposing Kedusha on this money. So that's one of the reasons I think that for us, time matters. We understand it's limited. We understand how precious it is. And we hope that we have the wisdom and the internal koach to use our time
wisely
and in the right way. We know that we have enemies of the Jewish people who see things very different. But Baruch Hashem, we're here. We're here. After all,
magnificent. Toda Rabba. Thank you.
Hope you enjoy the shiur. Hopefully things to think about. And really the purpose of our shiur not only is learning, which it is, but saying it over, repeating it, sharing it with other people, making your Shabbos and other people's Shabbos is more special. Hey, I learned something on Tuesday night. I think you'll enjoy hearing it. And telling it over, telling yourself, review it in your mind, because hopefully that makes the Shabbos kadosh, that makes the Shabbos holy. Just want to thank everybody again for coming and let you know how much I appreciate that. Have a healthy week. May this be a week where finally we hear about Yeshua, we hear about God's intervention and God bringing our hostages home, bringing an end to the fighting, making our soldiers safe, making the Jewish people safe.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Good night, everybody.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you.